In court, my wife pointed a manicured finger at my chest and laughed. She told the judge I was broken. She told the room I was senile. Her lover sat behind her grinning like a shark, while my son, the boy I had raised for 35 years, refused to even look me in the eye. They thought they had won. They thought the old clockmaker had finally run out of time. But then the judge opened the envelope I had sent her. She read the letter inside, looked up at my wife, and smiled. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment the hunter became the prey. But before I tell you how I checkmated them all, let me take you back to the beginning. Back to the moment I almost died, not on the operating table, but in my own bedroom. If you have ever been betrayed by the people you loved the most, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. My name is Ben Carter, and this is my story. I floated in a dark, thick fog. My body felt like it was made of lead, weighed down by invisible anchors that pulled me deep into the mattress. I tried to lift my hand just an inch, but the signal from my brain got lost somewhere in my shoulder. Nothing moved. My eyelids felt like rusty garage doors sealed shut by sleep and the heavy residue of anesthesia. The air in the room tasted stale and recycled, mixed with the sharp chemical sting of iodine and rubbing alcohol. It was the smell of sickness. It was the smell of weakness. Somewhere to my left, a machine kept rhythm for me. Hiss, click, hiss, click, an oxygen concentrator. I was alive. The triple bypass surgery hadn't killed me, but as the fog in my mind began to lift, replaced by the dull, throbbing ache in the center of my chest, I realized something was wrong. Not with my heart, but with the room. It was too quiet, too cold. And then I heard it. A sound that cut through the haze sharper than any surgeon's scalpel. It was a whisper, but in the silence of the house it sounded like a scream. It was coming from the hallway, just outside the open door of our master bedroom. I recognized the voices instantly. Ryan, my son, and Camilla, my wife of 45 years. I expected to hear worry. I expected to hear prayers. Instead, I heard annoyance. "He is still breathing." "Mom," Ryan whispered. His voice was tight, vibrating with a nervous energy I couldn't understand. "The doctor said he is a fighter. He said the surgery was a success." "Fighters get tired," Camilla replied. Her voice was ice cold, lacking even a single ounce of the warmth she usually displayed in public. "Be patient." The surgery took a lot out of him. He is 70 years old. His body can only take so much. "But what if he wakes up and asks for the ledger?" Ryan hissed. I could hear the pacing in his footsteps, the scuff of his expensive shoes on the hardwood floor. What if he wants to see the statements? "We moved the funds last Tuesday, Mom. If he logs in and sees the zeros, he is going to know." "Stop panicking," Camilla snapped. "You are sweating like a pig. Listen to me. Ben trusts me. He has trusted me for half a century. Even if he sees something, I will tell him it is a glitch or a new investment strategy. He will believe me because he wants to believe me." "I don't know," Ryan muttered. "He is sharp with numbers. He built this whole life on precision." "He was sharp," Camilla corrected him, her tone dripping with a condescension that made my blood run cold. "Now he is just a sentimental old fool. A sentimental old fool who thinks his family loves him more than his money. Just let him sleep. Nature will take its course." That phrase hit me harder than the heart attack had. Sentimental old fool. It didn't just hurt. It twisted inside my fresh surgical wound like a jagged knife. I lay there frozen, listening to the two people I had built my entire world around, discussing my death like it was a delayed business transaction. They weren't waiting for me to recover. They were waiting for me to expire. A scream built up in my throat, a primal roar of betrayal, but it died before it reached my lips. My body was still too weak to obey my rage. My heart stitched together and fragile began to hammer against my ribs. Thump, Thump, thump. The rhythm on the monitor next to my bed sped up. The beeping became faster. Beep, beep, beep. If they heard the monitor, they would know I was awake. They would know I heard them. Panic washed over me, cold and terrifying. I wasn't safe. This wasn't my home anymore. This was a cage, and I was lying defenseless in the middle of it. I was a wounded animal in a den of vipers. If I showed any sign of strength, any sign of suspicion, they would strike before I could defend myself. I had to calm down. I had to think like a watchmaker. Precision. Control. Patience. I closed my eyes tighter, forcing my breathing to slow. Inhale. Exhale. I imagined the gears of a clock ticking slowly, methodically. I forced my heart rate down beat by beat, willing the machine to go back to its slow, steady rhythm. I focused on the pain in my chest, using it as an anchor to ground myself. Footsteps approached. The smell of expensive perfume filled the air, choking me. It was Chanel No. 5, the scent I bought her every Christmas, the scent I used to associate with comfort and love. Now it smelled like deception. I felt a hand on my forehead. It wasn't a loving touch. It was cold and clinical, like checking the temperature of a turkey in the oven. "He is out cold," Camilla whispered, her voice hovering right above my face. "Look at him. Pathetic. He used to be so strong. Now look at him." "Let's go," Ryan said from the doorway. "I can't stand the smell in here. It smells like death." They walked away. I heard their footsteps retreating down the hall, followed by the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen. I lay in the darkness, tears leaking from the corners of my eyes, sliding hot and salty into my ears. I didn't wipe them away. I couldn't move my arms yet. But in that darkness, the sentimental old fool died. And something else woke up. Something colder. Something harder. They thought I was broken. They thought I was finished. But they forgot one thing. I was a man who fixed broken things for a living, and I was about to fix this family once and for all. The silence that followed the shattering glass was heavy and suffocating. I had deliberately swept the tumbler off the nightstand, watching it explode against the hardwood floor into 1,000 glistening shards. It was a desperate move, a summon, but it was the only weapon I had left in my arsenal. My body was screaming in protest. Every movement felt like tearing the fresh stitches that held my chest together. The room spun violently as I tried to anchor myself, my hand gripping the edge of the mattress until my knuckles turned white. I needed to see them. I needed to look into their eyes right now, while the echo of their betrayal was still ringing in my ears. I needed to see if they could look at me, the man who had given them everything, and lie without blinking. The pain in my sternum was a hot, jagged fire, but it was nothing compared to the ice spreading through my veins. I forced myself to take shallow, ragged breaths, preparing my mask. If they thought I was a fragile, confused old man, then that is exactly what I would give them. I let my shoulders slump, erasing the strength I had built up over 70 years of hard labor, and composed my face into a portrait of disorientation and fear. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. Not the slow, measured steps of concerned caregivers, but the frantic, annoyed scurrying of people whose secret meeting had been interrupted. The door flew open. Camilla was the first one through, her face flushed, her eyes wide. For a split second I saw the annoyance flaring in her pupils, the sharp calculation of a woman inconvenienced. But then, as if a director had yelled action, her expression softened into a mask of exaggerated terror. "Ben," she gasped, rushing to my side, her hands fluttering over me like nervous birds. "Oh my God, Ben, what happened? Are you all right? You scared me to death." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fine lines around her eyes, that I used to kiss the mouth that had whispered promises of eternity. Now all I could see was a stranger wearing my wife's skin. I tried to reach for the water, I stammered, making my voice tremble more than necessary. "I was so thirsty, Camilla. I didn't mean to drop it. I'm sorry. I'm so clumsy." Ryan appeared in the doorway a second later. He didn't rush to me. He stopped at the threshold, his eyes darting to the broken glass, then to me, then to his watch. It was a Rolex I had bought him when he graduated business school. He looked at it as if calculating how much time this little drama was going to cost him. "Dad." "You know the doctor said strict bed rest," Ryan said, walking over with a sigh that he tried to disguise as a deep breath of concern. He grabbed a handful of tissues and started picking up the glass. His movements sharp and aggressive. "You can't just go reaching for things. You're not stable yet." "I just wanted water," I whispered, leaning back against the pillows, letting my eyelids droop. "We will get you water," Ben Camilla said, stroking my arm. Her touch felt burning hot, repulsive. "Come on, let's get you to the kitchen. The maid is cleaning the room anyway. You need to eat something. You need your strength." Getting to the kitchen was a humiliating parade. I leaned my weight on Ryan, feeling the tension in his frame. He wasn't supporting me. He was enduring me. His muscles were rigid, and he smelled of stress sweat and expensive cologne. We shuffled down the hallway, the very hallway where they had just planned my financial demise. They settled me into my favorite armchair at the breakfast nook, propping me up with pillows like a child. The sun was streaming in through the bay windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a beautiful golden morning, the kind of morning I used to live for. Now the light just seemed to highlight the falseness of everything around me. "I made you some oatmeal," Dad Ryan said, placing a bowl in front of me. It was lukewarm. He sat down opposite me, picking up a spoon. "Here. Let me help you." "I can feed myself, Ryan," I said softly. No, save your energy," Camilla interjected, pouring herself a cup of coffee and leaning against the granite counter. She watched us like a hawk. "Let him help you, Ben. You just had open-heart surgery. Don't be stubborn." So I opened my mouth. I let my grown son, a man of 35, feed me like an infant. It was degrading. It was necessary. Every time he brought the spoon to my lips, I saw his eyes flicker away. He looked at the window. He looked at his phone buzzing on the table. He looked at the clock on the wall. He looked everywhere except at me. He was going through the motions of love, performing the duties of a son, but his mind was already calculating the inheritance. "This is good," I lied, swallowing the tasteless mush. "Thank you, son. We were just talking about you, actually," Camilla said, her voice bright and cheery, the perfect picture of a devoted wife. "Before you woke up, we were just saying how lucky we are that you are so strong." "Were you?" I asked, keeping my gaze fixed on my spoon. I thought I heard whispering. Arguments. Camilla laughed, a brittle tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, Ben, you and your imagination. Probably the medication making you hear things. We were just discussing logistics. You know how to manage the house while you recover." Ryan shoved another spoonful into my mouth, a little too forcefully this time. "Yeah, Dad. Just boring stuff. You don't need to worry about any of it." I swallowed slowly, wiping my mouth with a napkin. My hand shook, and this time the tremor was real. The proximity of their lies was making me physically ill. I decided to push. I needed to see how far they would go. I needed to see the architecture of their deceit. "What about the factory?" I asked, looking up and locking eyes with Ryan. "The quarterly review is next week. And the trust accounts. I need to approve the transfers for the new equipment. I can't let the business stall just because I'm sick." The air in the kitchen changed instantly. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ryan froze the spoon, hovering halfway between the bowl and my mouth. He slowly lowered it to the table. He exchanged a quick, panicked glance with Camilla. I saw it. It was subtle, a mere flicker of eyelids, but to a man who had spent his life watching the microscopic movements of watch gears, it was a billboard. "Dad," Ryan said, his voice dropping an octave, taking on that patronizing tone one uses with a toddler or a pet. We already handled it. Handled it, I repeated. How I have the security keys. I have the final authorization codes. Camilla stepped forward, placing a hand on Ryan's shoulder, signaling him to back down. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes remained flat, cold, and predatory. Ben, darling, listen to me. When you went into surgery, we had to make some emergency decisions. To protect you. To protect the legacy you built. What kind of decisions, I asked, letting a hint of confusion seep into my voice. We spoke to the lawyers, Ryan said, regaining his composure. He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table. We invoked the emergency power of attorney. Just temporarily. Just until you get your head back on straight. We moved some assets into a holding trust. Safe. Secure. You don't have to lift a finger. A holding trust. The lie was so smooth, so polished. If I hadn't heard them earlier, I might have believed it. I might have thanked them. They weren't protecting the assets for me. They were fencing them off from me. They were locking the gates and changing the keys. But the passwords, I muttered, looking down at my hands. I tried to check my email on the iPad. It wouldn't let me in. Oh, that Camilla waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. The bank insisted on a security update. Cybersecurity threats, you know how it is these days. We changed them to keep everything safe. We didn't want to burden you with memorizing new codes while you are on all those painkillers. I looked up at my wife. She was beaming at me, a radiant, supportive spouse. But behind that mask, I saw the truth. She didn't see a husband. She saw an obstacle. She saw a signature on a check. She saw a timeline that was taking too long to expire. You are doing all this for me, I asked quietly. Of course, Ben, Camilla said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. Her lips were dry and cold. Everything we do is for you. We just want you to rest. We want you to stop worrying about money and control and just let go. Let go. The double meaning hung in the air between us. They wanted me to let go of the business. They wanted me to let go of the accounts. And ultimately, they wanted me to let go of life. I looked at Ryan. He was checking his watch again. Okay, I said, closing my eyes, hiding the fire that was starting to burn behind them. Okay. Thank you, I'm tired now. Good, Ryan said, standing up immediately, relief washing over his face. I'll help you back to bed. As he hoisted me up, his grip firm but impersonal, I leaned my head against his shoulder. He flinched slightly. He didn't want the contact. He didn't want the connection. And as we walked back toward the bedroom, leaving the bright kitchen behind, I realized something that terrified me more than the surgery ever had. I was completely alone. The house was full, but I was solitary. But as my foot crossed the threshold of the bedroom, the fear began to harden into something else, something useful. They thought they were putting the old man back to sleep. They didn't realize they were waking up the master craftsman. They had taken my passwords. They had taken my keys. But they had forgotten the one thing I still had. My mind. And I was about to use it to dismantle their perfect little lie piece by piece. The iPad felt heavy in my hands, weighing far more than its few ounces of aluminum and glass should have. It felt like a stone tablet, a barrier between me and the empire I had built with my own 2 hands. My fingers, usually so steady when placing the microscopic gears of a tourbillon, were trembling uncontrollably. It was the aftermath of the anesthesia, yes, but it was also the adrenaline of fear. I tapped the blue banking icon. The screen flashed white, reflecting my pale, gaunt face back at me. I typed in the password I had used for 10 years. It was a combination of my first workshop address and the date I opened my first store. It was a part of me. I pressed enter. The little wheel spun for a second, mocking me before the text turned red. Incorrect password. My heart skipped a beat. I took a deep breath, forcing my hand to steady itself against the duvet. I must have mistyped it. My fingers were clumsy. I tried again, slower this time, hunting and pecking each character with agonizing precision. I checked the caps lock. I checked the numbers. Enter. Incorrect password. Please try again. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a glitch. I tried a third time, my breathing becoming shallow and ragged. I tried the backup password, the one I used for the emergency reserve accounts. Account locked. Too many failed attempts. Please contact the administrator. Administrator. I was the administrator. I was the owner. I was the founder. But sitting there in my pajamas, with tubes still taped to my arm, I was nothing more than an unauthorized user. A ghost in my own machine. The screen went dark and I saw my reflection again. I looked small. I looked powerless. They hadn't just changed the locks on the doors. They had changed the locks on my life. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with my heart, and everything to do with the realization that I was being erased. I was being digitally evicted from my own existence. I tapped the screen frantically, hoping for a different result, hoping for a miracle. But the cold glass just stared back at me, indifferent, and shut tight. I was trapped in this room, cut off from my resources, cut off from my allies, and completely at the mercy of the people who wanted me gone. The door handle turned, and I shoved the iPad under the heavy duvet just as Camilla breezed back into the room. She was carrying a fresh pitcher of water, her face arranged in that perfect porcelain mask of concern. But I noticed something different this time. She had changed. She was no longer wearing the comfortable house clothes she had on earlier. She was wearing a silk blouse and pearl earrings, and she had reapplied her lipstick. "You should be sleeping, Ben," she scolded gently, setting the pitcher down on the nightstand. She reached out and smoothed the blanket, her hand brushing right over the hidden iPad. I held my breath. "Why are you awake? You need to let your body heal. I couldn't sleep." I rasped my voice, sounding more pathetic than I intended. "I just wanted to check the news." "No news," she said firmly, shaking her head as if talking to a naughty child. "The doctor said no stress. The world will keep turning without you watching it, Ben. Just rest." She picked up her phone from the dresser where she had left it charging. As she lifted it, the screen lit up with a notification. It was facing me. It was only visible for a split second, a flash of white text on a black background, but my eyes, trained to spot the tiniest imperfection in a diamond, caught it instantly. "Still on for tonight." Monsieur Camilla looked at the message, and for a fleeting moment, a small, secretive smile played on her lips. It was a smile of anticipation, a smile of desire. It was a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in 20 years. She quickly swiped the notification away and shoved the phone into her pocket, turning back to me with dead flat eyes. "I have to run a few errands," she said, her voice casual. "Pick up your prescriptions, grab some groceries. Ryan is in the study if you need anything. I won't be long." Errands. Dressed in silk and pearls. I nodded, closing my eyes to hide the disgust that I knew was burning in them. "Okay," I whispered. "Drive safe." As soon as the door clicked shut, I waited. I counted to 60, listening to the click-clack of her heels fading down the hallway, then the heavy thud of the front door closing. Then the roar of her Mercedes engine starting up and pulling away. I didn't reach for the iPad again. That door was closed. I needed a window. I threw the covers off, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. The pain in my chest roared a hot, tearing sensation, but I gritted my teeth and pushed through it. I stood up, swaying like a drunkard, and shuffled over to the small writing desk in the corner of the room. This was where the maid piled the mail that she didn't think was important enough to bring to the study. Junk mail, flyers, coupons, and the secondary bills. Camilla was meticulous about the main accounts, the ones with the millions. She scrubbed those clean. But she was arrogant. And arrogance makes people sloppy with the small details. She didn't think I would check the mail. She didn't think I could even get out of bed to check the mail. I rifled through the stack with trembling hands. Pizza coupons, a catalog for garden furniture, a charity solicitation. And then buried at the bottom a thin white envelope. The statement for the Platinum Rewards Visa. This was a card we rarely used. It was for emergencies or for travel incidentals. I tore the envelope open, my breath catching in my throat. I unfolded the paper, my eyes scanning the list of transactions. Most of it was mundane. Gas, pharmacy, and then near the bottom, the date jumped out at me. Tuesday, October 14th. I froze. Tuesday. That was the night before my surgery. That was the night I was in the hospital hooked up to monitors, terrified that I wouldn't wake up. I remembered that night vividly. Camilla had come to my bedside, holding my hand, tears in her eyes. She told me she couldn't stay late because she had to go to the church. She said she was going to a special prayer vigil for me. She said she was going to spend the night on her knees, begging God to save my life. I had been so touched. I had cried. I had told her she was an angel. I looked at the statement. October 14th. Le Mirage. $452. Le Mirage. The most expensive French restaurant in the city. A place of candlelight, romantic music, and intimate booths. A place where you went to celebrate, not to pray. I stared at the number until it blurred. $452. That wasn't a meal for one. That was a feast for two. Wine, appetizers, entrees, dessert. While I was lying in a hospital gown, shivering with fear, wondering if I would ever see the sun again, my wife was eating foie gras and drinking vintage Cabernet. She wasn't on her knees praying for my salvation. She was raising a glass to my impending death. A sound escaped my throat, a low, guttural growl that sounded like it came from a wounded animal. The paper crumpled in my fist. The betrayal wasn't just about the money. It wasn't just about the lies. It was about the cruelty. The absolute heartless cruelty of using God and prayer as an alibi for a date night with her lover. She had looked me in the eye, touched my dying face, and lied with the ease of a sociopath. The anger that flooded my system was unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold. It was clarifying. It burned away the last remnants of the anesthesia. It burned away the fear. It burned away the love I still held for her. I smoothed the paper out on the desk. This was it. This was the loose thread. They thought they had woven a perfect tapestry of lies, but here it was, the first crack in the facade. A $452 dinner receipt. I folded the paper carefully, tucking it into the pocket of my pajama bottoms. It was a small piece of paper, but it was heavy. It was the weight of the truth. I looked at the clock on the wall. I had time. Ryan was downstairs, probably watching sports or looking at real estate listings for houses he would buy with my money. Camilla was out with M. I was alone, but I wasn't helpless. I looked at the old grandfather clock standing in the corner of the room, ticking steadily. They thought I was a broken old man. But they forgot one thing. Broken clocks can be fixed. And sometimes when you fix them, you can set the time to whatever you want. And right now, it was time for war. I turned away from the desk and looked toward the door. I needed more. This receipt was a start, but it wasn't a weapon. I needed a weapon, and I knew exactly where to build one. I began to walk toward the door, not shuffling this time, but marching. Slow, painful, but steady. The hunt had begun. The garage door clicked shut behind me, sealing off the sterile, suffocating atmosphere of the house. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs, not with the scent of potpourri and deception, but with the heavy grounding smells of old grease sawdust and cold iron. This was my sanctuary. This was the one room in the mansion that Camilla rarely entered, calling it a filthy dungeon that ruined the aesthetic of her perfect home. To me, it was a cathedral. The afternoon sun sliced through the high, dusty windows, illuminating millions of dancing motes that hung in the air like suspended gold dust. My workbench stood in the center, a heavy slab of scarred oak that I had salvaged from a factory 50 years ago. It was covered in a chaotic yet organized layer of tools, calipers, screwdrivers, and spools of copper wire. I walked over to the bench, my footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. The pain in my chest was still there, a dull throb reminding me of my mortality. But here, surrounded by my machines, it felt manageable. I ran my hand over the cold metal of my lathe. It was solid. It was real. Unlike the smiles of my wife or the concern of my son, these machines did not lie. If you treated them with respect, they worked. If you neglected them, they broke. It was a simple, honest relationship, the kind I had been starving for without even realizing it. I felt a shift happen inside me. The trembling in my legs seemed to steady. The fog in my brain lingering from the medication, and the shock began to clear, blown away by the familiarity of this space. I wasn't Ben the patient here. I wasn't Ben the victim. I was Benjamin Carter, master craftsman, and I had work to do. I moved to the shelf where the rejects lived. There, gathering dust, sat the object of my mission. It was a 19th century French mantel clock, a heavy ornate piece made of bronze and mahogany. It was topped with a magnificent eagle, its wings spread wide in a display of power, its beak open in a silent scream. Camilla had banished it from the living room years ago, calling it grotesque and old-fashioned. I lifted it down. It was heavy, maybe 20 pounds, but I didn't feel the weight. I felt the purpose. I carried it to the workbench and cleared a space, sweeping away a pile of schematics with my forearm. I sat down on my stool, the leather creaking under my weight, and turned on the magnifying lamp. The bright circular light flooded the clock, revealing every scratch, every speck of dust, every imperfection. I reached for my set of precision screwdrivers. As my fingers curled around the familiar rubber grip of the smallest driver, something miraculous happened. The shaking stopped. The tremors that had plagued me in the bedroom, the weakness that made me spill the water, vanished. My hands remembered. They remembered 50 years of manipulating gears smaller than a grain of rice. They remembered the tension of a mainspring and the delicate balance of a pallet fork. I was no longer an old man. I was a surgeon of time. I began to disassemble the clock with a fluidity that bordered on aggressive. I removed the back panel, exposing the brass movement inside. It was a beautiful, complex heart, silent for years, waiting to be restarted. But I wasn't here to fix the time. I was here to record it. I carefully removed the suspension spring and the pendulum, setting them aside on a velvet cloth. Then I turned my attention to the eagle on top. The casting was hollow, a perfect hiding spot. I picked up the tiny spy camera I had purchased months ago for a security project I never finished. It was a black cube no larger than a sugar cube with a pinhole lens. I brought the eagle closer to the light. The eyes were deep-set, painted black. With a micro drill, I carefully bored a hole through the left eye of the eagle. The metal curled away in tiny golden ribbons. I worked slowly, holding my breath, my hand as steady as a rock. One slip and I would ruin the casting. One slip and the trap would be obvious. I blew the dust away. Perfect. A tiny tunnel through the bronze, invisible unless you were looking for it with a magnifying glass. I inserted the camera from the inside of the casting. It fit snugly. I secured it with a dab of industrial epoxy, the smell of the glue sharp and pungent. Now for the power. I couldn't run a wire to the wall. Camilla would see it instantly. I had to make it self-sufficient. I took a high-capacity lithium battery pack, flat and rectangular, and mounted it inside the wooden base of the clock, tucking it behind the main gear train. I stripped the wires with my teeth, the taste of plastic familiar and comforting, and soldered them to the camera leads. The solder smoked a thin gray plume rising into the light. I watched the silver liquid cool and harden, sealing the connection. I pulled out my phone and opened the app associated with the camera. I waited. The screen flickered, and then there it was, a crystal-clear, wide-angle view of my workshop seen from the perspective of the eagle. I moved my hand in front of the lens. The image on the phone moved instantly. The audio feed picked up the sound of my own breathing. It was working. I had turned a piece of forgotten junk into a high-tech surveillance device. I reassembled the clock, putting every screw back in its place, polishing the mahogany case until it gleamed. I wound the mainspring. The clock began to tick. Tock, tock, tock. A steady rhythmic heartbeat. It was alive, and it was watching. I stood up, lifting the clock into my arms. It felt different now. It wasn't just metal and wood anymore. It was a witness. I walked out of the garage, the bright sunlight blinding me for a moment, and made my way back into the house. I walked straight to the living room. The house was quiet. Ryan must have gone out. I placed the clock on the center of the mantelpiece, directly facing the large leather sofa, where Camilla liked to hold court. I adjusted the angle slightly, ensuring the eagle's eye had a perfect view of the entire room. "Well, look who is up and about," a voice sneered from the doorway. I turned slowly. Camilla was standing there holding a shopping bag from a high-end boutique. She looked at the clock, her lip curling in disgust. "I thought I told you to get rid of that hideous thing years ago," she said, walking into the room and dropping her bag on the chair. "It collects dust. It looks like something from a haunted house." "Honestly, Ben, why do you insist on filling my house with your junk?" I looked at her. She was so confident, so secure in her deception. She thought she was looking at a piece of trash. She didn't realize she was looking at her own judge and jury. I smiled at her, a tired, gentle smile that hid the wolf inside me. "I just fixed it, Camilla. I thought it would be nice to have it running again. The sound of the ticking. It comforts me. It reminds me of better times." She rolled her eyes, walking over to the mirror to check her hair. "Whatever. Just don't expect the maid to clean it. If you want to keep your scraps of metal, you dust them yourself. You still love your little toys more than you care about how this house looks." I reached out and touched the cold bronze wing of the eagle. She was right. I did love my toys, because my toys were loyal. "You are right," I said softly, looking at her reflection in the mirror. "It is old, and maybe it is a bit ugly, but I like it." "Why?" she asked, turning to face me, genuine confusion on her face. "What could you possibly like about that piece of iron?" I looked her dead in the eye, my hand resting protectively on the clock. "Because, Camilla," I said, my voice steady and calm, "it is the only thing in this house that doesn't know how to lie." She frowned, a flicker of unease crossing her face, but she quickly dismissed it with a scoff. "You are talking nonsense again, Ben. Go take your pills. You're starting to sound delusional." She turned and walked out of the room, her heels clicking on the floor. I stayed there, standing by the fireplace, listening to the steady, rhythmic ticking of the clock. Tock, tock, tock. The trap was set. The eagle was watching. And tonight, when the sun went down and the shadows filled this room, I would catch my prey. The performance began in the kitchen at 9 o'clock sharp. I knew that for this trap to work, I had to be more than just a victim. I had to be a convincing actor in a play where the audience wanted me dead. I shuffled into the room, letting my feet drag heavily on the tiles, my shoulders slumped in a posture of absolute defeat. Camilla and Ryan were sitting at the island, their conversation dying instantly as I entered. The silence was thick with secrets, but I pretended not to notice. I reached for the amber prescription bottle on the counter, the one labeled for severe insomnia. My hands shook a tremor that was half real and half calculated. I rattled the bottle, making sure they heard the sound of the pills striking the plastic walls. "I am exhausted," I announced, my voice cracking slightly. "The doctor said these would help me sleep through the night without pain. I think I am going to take 2. I just want to black out for 12 hours. I saw the look that passed between them. It was a look of relief, a look of anticipation. Camilla stood up, her movements solicitous and eager. She filled a glass of water from the fridge and handed it to me. "That is a good idea, Ben," she said, her voice dripping with fake honey. "You need the rest. The deep sleep will do you good. Just take them and go lie down. We will handle everything down here." I tipped the 2 small white pills into my palm. I raised my hand to my mouth, throwing my head back in a dramatic gesture of swallowing. But the pills never touched my tongue. With a sleight of hand I had practiced 1,000 times with tiny watch gears, I palmed them, sliding them between my fingers while I took a large gulp of water. I swallowed the liquid loudly, letting out a sigh of satisfaction. "There," I said, blinking slowly, as if the chemicals were already hitting my bloodstream. "That should do it." I placed the glass in the sink and turned to them. "Good night, Camilla. Good night, Ryan." "Sleep tight, Dad," Ryan said, not looking up from his phone. I walked out of the kitchen, pausing at the doorway to give a fake yawn that shook my whole body. I climbed the stairs, each step heavy and deliberate, until I reached the sanctuary of the bedroom. I closed the door and locked it. The moment the lock clicked, the old man vanished. I spat the dry pills into the trash can and moved quickly to the bed. I arranged the pillows, pulled the heavy duvet up to my chin, and turned off the lamp. Darkness swallowed the room instantly, but I was not asleep. I was wide awake, my senses heightened, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I reached under the pillow and pulled out my phone, plugging in a single earbud. The small screen was the only light in the room, a rectangular portal into the nightmare awaiting me downstairs. Time became a physical thing, stretching and warping in the darkness. 10 o'clock came and went. I lay motionless, staring at the feed from the eagle's eye. The living room was empty, bathed in the soft glow of the recessed lighting. It looked peaceful, a beautiful room in a beautiful home. But I knew it was a stage set waiting for the actors. My eyes burned from not blinking. My body ached from staying still. The silence of the house was oppressive, amplified by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner of my bedroom, which seemed to sync with the clock downstairs. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Every second was a step closer to the truth I dreaded. Then, at exactly 11 o'clock, the silence shattered. The doorbell rang. It wasn't a hesitant ring. It was 2 short, confident bursts. I watched the screen. Camilla appeared instantly, as if she had been waiting by the door. She was smoothing her dress, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. She opened the door, and there he was. Dr. Miles Harrison. I had met him a few times before, briefly. He was my wife's yoga instructor, her nutritionist, her spiritual guide. Now, seeing him through the unblinking eye of the hidden camera, I saw him for what he really was. He was younger than me by 10 years, fit with the kind of tan that comes from leisure, not labor. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, his hair perfectly coiffed, his smile dazzling and predatory. He didn't look like a visitor. He walked in with the swagger of a man who already owned the place. He didn't ask if I was home. He didn't ask how I was doing. He simply stepped across the threshold and pulled my wife into his arms. The camera had a high-definition lens, and the image was crystal clear. I watched paralyzed as Miles kissed my wife. It wasn't a friendly greeting. It was hungry, possessive, and practiced. Camilla melted into him, her hands gripping the lapels of his expensive jacket. It was a scene from a romance movie playing out on the screen of my phone while I lay a few floors above them, watching my life disintegrate. "Is he out?" Miles asked, pulling back just enough to speak. His voice came through the earbud clear as a bell. "He took 2 sleeping pills." Camilla laughed, a low, throaty sound I hadn't heard in years. "He is out like a light. He won't wake up if a bomb goes off. Good Miles grinned, showing perfect white teeth. I hate whispering. They walked into the living room hand in hand. They moved towards the large leather sofa. My sofa. The sofa where I sat to read the paper on Sundays. The sofa where I had nursed my heart condition. They sat down not on separate cushions but tangled together. Miles put his feet up on the coffee table, his shoes resting on the book of antique watch movements I had left there. The disrespect was so casual, so effortless, that it felt like a physical slap. So Miles said, running his hand along Camilla's arm, "Did you do it? Did you access the main accounts?" Camilla nodded, reaching for a glass of wine she must have poured earlier. "I initiated the transfer this afternoon. The lawyers are drafting the trust documents as we speak. We are moving the liquid assets to the offshore shell company. By the time he realizes what is happening, the accounts will be empty." And the factory, Miles asked, his eyes gleaming with greed. "Ryan is handling the board," she replied, taking a sip of wine. "He is going to declare Ben mentally incompetent due to post-operative cognitive decline. We have the medical reports ready to be doctored. Once the board votes him out, we sell the land to the developers." I lay in the dark, my hand stuffed into my mouth, biting down hard on my own knuckles. I bit until I tasted the metallic tang of blood. I had to stifle the scream building in my throat. I had to silence the sob that wanted to tear my chest open. Hearing it was different from suspecting it. Suspecting was a shadow. Hearing was a blade. They were discussing the dismantling of my life's work, the erasure of my identity between kisses and caresses. "Does he suspect anything?" Miles asked, nuzzling her neck. Camilla laughed again, throwing her head back. "Ben. Please. He is a sentimental old fool. He thinks I am nursing him back to health. He was crying this morning, Miles. Crying. Thanking me for taking care of him. It was pathetic. Pathetic." The word echoed in my earbud. Pathetic. I watched them on the screen, their bodies intertwining on my sofa, their laughter filling my living room. I felt tears streaming down my face, hot and fast, soaking the pillow. But beneath the grief, beneath the humiliation, the cold steel of my resolve was hardening. They thought I was asleep. They thought I was finished. But the camera was recording. Every word, every touch, every conspiracy. I kept watching, forcing myself not to look away, forcing myself to witness every second of their treachery. I would not sleep tonight. I would not rest. I would watch until I had enough poison to kill them both. The laughter died down, eventually replaced by the clinking of wine glasses and the rustle of fabric. On the small screen of my phone, I watched Miles shift his weight on the sofa. He looked uneasy. He swirled the red liquid in his glass, staring at the dark depths, as if looking for a way out of a trap he hadn't realized he had stepped into. Even in his arrogance, he seemed to sense a variable he couldn't control, a loose thread that could unravel their entire tapestry of deceit. "But what about the boy?" Miles asked, his voice losing some of its earlier bravado. "Ryan is on board now because of the money, sure. Greed is a powerful motivator. But when the push comes to shove, when we actually throw the old man out on the street or put him in a home, what then?" Camilla sighed, annoyed at having her celebration interrupted by logic. She kicked off her shoes and curled her legs under her. "What about him?" "He is still his son," Camilla, Miles pressed, leaning forward. 35 years is a long time. There is a bond there. Biology aside, shared history matters. I have seen the way Ryan looks at him sometimes. There is guilt. If Ben begs him, if Ben plays the "I raised you" card, the kid might crack. And if he cracks, if he testifies that Ben is competent, we all go to jail for fraud. My heart gave a painful lurch in my chest. For a second, just a split second, a foolish, desperate hope ignited in the ashes of my soul. Maybe Miles was right. Maybe beneath the greed, beneath the coldness, and the entitlement, my son was still in there somewhere. Ryan, the boy. I taught to ride a bike without training wheels. Ryan, who used to call me his hero when I fixed his broken toys. Was it possible that he was just being manipulated by his mother? Was it possible that if I reached out to him but really reached out, he would choose me? I held my breath, clutching the phone so hard my fingers ached, waiting for Camilla's answer, praying for a miracle. Camilla set her glass down on the coffee table with a sharp click that echoed through my earbud. She turned to Miles, her expression softening into something almost maternal but twisted and dark. She reached out and touched his cheek, stroking his jawline with her thumb. "Oh, Miles," she cooed. "You really don't get it, do you? You are worrying about a bond that doesn't exist. You are worrying about a ghost." "What do you mean?" Miles asked. "Ryan won't betray us," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that the high-fidelity microphone picked up perfectly. "He won't betray us because he knows who his real family is. He knows who his real father is." Miles froze. I froze. The world seemed to stop spinning on its axis. The silence in the room was absolute heavy with the weight of the incoming blow. "I told him last week," Camilla continued, a cruel, triumphant smile playing on her lips. "I told him the truth about the summer of 1989. I told him that while Ben was busy building his stupid workshop and obsessing over his machines, you and I were creating him. Ryan isn't Ben's son, Miles. He is yours." The air left the room. My lungs refused to inflate. I stared at the screen, my mind reeling, trying to process the enormity of the lie that had been my life. 35 years. Every birthday party. Every graduation. Every time I told him I was proud of him. Every time I looked for my reflection in his face. It was all a farce. It was all a long, cruel joke played on a man they considered a fool. Suddenly 1,000 tiny memories flooded my brain. Memories I had suppressed or explained away. The way Ryan never had my patience for mechanics. The way he looked nothing like me, having Miles's dark eyes and sharp chin instead. The distance he always kept, like he sensed he didn't belong to me. I wasn't his father. I was just the bank account that raised him. I was the fool who paid for his private schools and his cars, while his mother and her lover laughed at me in the shadows. The biological link I thought would save me was the very thing that condemned me. Ryan didn't hate me because I was old. He hated me because I was the intruder in his real family. I expected to die. I expected my heart already stitched and scarred to finally give out under the weight of this ultimate betrayal. But it didn't. Instead, it slowed down. The frantic pounding ceased, replaced by a slow, heavy, rhythmic thud. It was the beat of a funeral drum. It was the sound of something dying, but it wasn't me. It was my love for them. I looked at the screen one last time. Miles was staring at Camilla in shock, mouth open, and then slowly a grin spread across his face. A grin of victory, a grin of ownership. They had taken my money, my home, and now they had taken my past. They had retroactively stolen 35 years of fatherhood. I reached out and pressed the power button. The screen went black. The room plunged back into darkness. I lay back against the pillows, staring up at the invisible ceiling. I didn't cry, I was done crying. The tears had belonged to Ben, the husband, Ben, the father. That man was dead. He died the moment Camilla spoke those words. The man lying in the bed now was someone else entirely. I was no longer a victim trapped in a house of lies. I was a witness who had just collected the final piece of evidence. I was a judge who had just heard the confession. They wanted to declare me incompetent. They wanted to erase me. Fine. Let them try. They had no idea that they had just severed the last thread of mercy I held for them. I pulled the duvet up to my chin. I wasn't shaking anymore. I felt cold, solid, and dangerous. Tomorrow, the trial would begin. Not in a courtroom, but here in my life. And unlike them, I wouldn't need a lawyer to deliver the verdict. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in days, I slept. Not the sleep of the weak, but the rest of the soldier before the battle. My mind drifted back to a rainy Tuesday in November of 1995, a day that felt a lifetime away from the nightmare I was currently living. I was 40 years old, then, stronger with a steady hand and a reputation that was just beginning to spread beyond the county lines. I had received a summons that morning, a hand-delivered letter on heavy cream stationery embossed with a gold crest. It was from Julian Roth. The Julian Roth. He was a billionaire industrialist, a man known as much for his reclusive nature as for his ruthless business tactics. Rumors said he was dying. Rumors said he was mad. But the letter was simple. It said he had a problem that only a master could solve, and he had heard I was the best. I remembered driving my beat-up van up the winding driveway of his estate, the rain lashing against the windshield. The house was a Gothic fortress of stone and glass, perched on a cliff, overlooking the ocean. A butler led me into a library that smelled of old paper and expensive tobacco. Sitting in a wheelchair by the fire was Julian Roth. He looked frail, his skin like parchment paper stretched over a skull, but his eyes were sharp, burning with an intensity that made me want to look away. On the table in front of him sat the problem. It was an automaton, a mechanical peacock made of solid silver and encrusted with sapphires. It was a legendary piece rumored to have been made for a Russian czar in the 18th century. It was supposed to walk, spread its tail feathers, and sing a melody, but for 50 years it had been frozen. Roth told me that 10 experts from Switzerland and Germany had tried to fix it. They had all failed. They had suggested taking it apart, melting it down, or replacing the mechanism with modern parts. Roth had thrown them all out. He looked at me and asked if I was going to waste his time, too. I didn't answer him. I just looked at the bird. I didn't touch it at first. I just listened. I listened to the silence of the machine. I sensed the tension in the metal. I spent 3 days in that library. I didn't eat. I barely slept. I realized the problem wasn't a broken gear, but a misalignment of the soul of the machine. The previous repairman had tried to force it. I treated it like a living thing. I gently realigned the mainspring barrel, soothing the metal rather than commanding it. On the third evening, as Roth watched me from his chair, I turned the golden key. The sound was soft, at first a whirring of gears that had been dormant for half a century. Then the silver bird took a step. Then another. Its tail fanned out in a shimmering display of blue gems, and it opened its beak. A pure bell-like melody filled the room. It was magic. It was perfection. I looked up and saw tears streaming down Julian Roth's face. He didn't say a word. He just watched the bird sing until the mechanism wound down and the room returned to silence. That night, Roth called me to his desk. He poured 2 glasses of brandy. He told me that I was a rare breed. He said that everyone in his life, his business partners, his associates, even his own family, only saw the surface. They saw the gold, but they didn't care about the gears. They wanted the result, not the work. He told me about his daughter, Marianne. He said she hated him. She hated his money. She had left home to become a lawyer to fight against men like him. He said he respected her for it, but it broke his heart. He looked at me with those burning eyes and said that I had fixed the bird because I respected its integrity, not its value. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He slid it across the mahogany desk. I tried to refuse. I told him I would send him a bill for my hours. He laughed, a dry, rasping sound. He told me to take it. He said that money is just fuel, and one day I might need to burn it to keep warm. Inside the envelope were bearer bonds, anonymous, untraceable, and a key to a safety deposit box in Geneva. He told me to keep it secret. He told me to keep it for a rainy day when the world tried to crush me. I took the envelope, thanked him, and left. I never saw him again. He died 2 weeks later. I snapped back to the present, the memory fading like smoke. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, the darkness of the room pressing in on me. The rain from 30 years ago was gone, replaced by the suffocating silence of a house filled with traitors. But the lesson remained. Roth had given me fuel, and the rainy day he predicted had finally arrived. It was pouring. I stood up and walked to the closet. I pushed aside the rows of suits I rarely wore and knelt down. I pulled up the loose floorboard in the back corner, the one concealed by a heavy shoe rack. Underneath was a small fireproof lockbox. My hands didn't shake this time. I dialed in the combination. Click. The lid popped open. Inside, nestled in velvet, was the envelope. It was yellowed with age, smelling of the past. I opened it. The bonds were there. I did the math in my head. With the interest, with the compounding value over 3 decades, the contents of this envelope and the account in Switzerland were worth more than this entire house. They were worth more than the factory. They were worth more than everything Camilla and Miles were trying to steal from me combined. I held the papers in my hand. For years I had ignored them. I didn't need them. I was happy with my work, happy with my simple life. I had thought about donating them or leaving them to Ryan as a surprise inheritance. I almost laughed out loud at the thought. If I had given this to Ryan, he would have spent it on sports cars and bad investments within a year. I looked at the numbers again. This wasn't just money anymore. This was power. This was dignity. Camilla thought she was stripping me of my resources. She thought she was leaving me destitute, a ward of the state dependent on her charity. She had no idea that the old man she called a fool was holding a nuclear weapon. I didn't want the money for yachts or vacations. I didn't care about luxury. I cared about justice. I cared about the look on their faces when they realized they had lost. I cared about protecting my name. Roth had told me that money was fuel. Well, I was about to light a fire. I took the envelope and tucked it inside my shirt against my skin. It felt warm. It felt like armor. I closed the floorboard and stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the moon. They wanted a war. They wanted to destroy Benjamin Carter. They were about to find out that Benjamin Carter had friends in high places even from beyond the grave. And tomorrow I would make the first move. I would reach out to the one person who might understand the legacy of Julian Roth better than anyone. I would find his daughter. I would find the judge. I sat at the small desk in the corner of the guest room, the screen of my old laptop glowing in the dim light of dawn. I had retrieved the device from the back of a closet, bypassing the home network Camilla controlled and tethering it to my phone's data. I needed to know who held my fate in their hands. The legal notice Camilla's lawyers had so graciously emailed to my locked account listed the case number and the presiding official, the Honorable Marianne Hayes. The name felt heavy, familiar, vibrating with a resonance I couldn't quite place. I typed her name into the search bar, scrolling past the standard professional headshots and court rulings. Then I found it. An old obituary from 1995. Julian Roth, billionaire industrialist, survived by his estranged daughter, Marianne. I leaned back in the creaky wooden chair, a shiver running down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning chill. It was not a coincidence. I did not believe in coincidences anymore. I believed in mechanics, in cause and effect, in the intricate design of the universe. 30 years ago, I had fixed a bird for a dying father who lamented his broken relationship with his daughter. Now that daughter was the judge appointed to preside over the destruction of my life. It was a loop closing, a gear clicking into place after decades of spinning in the void. She had a reputation for being tough on wealthy men, on executives who thought they could buy their way out of trouble. Camilla's lawyers probably thought this was a disadvantage for me, the business owner. They didn't know that I wasn't just a businessman. I was the man who had made her father cry with joy. I was the keeper of the secret she probably didn't even know existed. I needed to move. I couldn't orchestrate this from a prison cell. I waited until I heard the shower running in the master bathroom. Camilla would be in there for 40 minutes, scrubbing away her sins with expensive exfoliants. Ryan was still asleep, likely dreaming of the Porsche he planned to buy with my severance package. I dressed quickly in my oldest, most nondescript clothes, a pair of gray slacks and a worn cardigan. I slipped out the back door, bypassing the squeaky hinge I had been meaning to oil for months, and walked 3 blocks to the bus stop. I didn't take my car. The GPS would track me. I met Arthur Finch at a place called Sally's Diner on the edge of the industrial district. It was a place that smelled of burnt coffee, bacon grease, and honest labor. It was a place Camilla would rather die than enter. Finch was sitting in a corner booth, blending into the worn red vinyl like a piece of old furniture. He was 80 years old, with skin like crumpled parchment and eyes that missed nothing. He had been my personal attorney for 40 years, handling the small things, the real things, not the corporate fluff. He was the only other person on Earth who knew about the Geneva account. I slid into the booth opposite him. He didn't say hello. He just pushed a mug of black coffee toward me and tapped the manila folder I had placed on the table. "You look like hell." Ben Finch croaked, his voice sounding like gravel in a mixer. "I feel like hell, Arthur," I replied, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "They are moving fast. They want to declare me incompetent next week." Finch chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Let them." I looked at him surprised. "Let them?" "Yes," he said, pulling a yellow legal pad from his briefcase. "If we stop them now, if we show our hand too early, they will just change tactics. They will settle. They will try to negotiate. You want to destroy them, don't you?" "I want them left with nothing," I said, my voice cold. "Just like they planned for me." "Then we let them walk into the trap," Finch said, sketching a diagram on the pad. "We let them file the motion. We let them stand up in court under oath and swear that you are senile. We let them present their falsified medical records. We let them dig the hole so deep they can never climb out. And then, when they think the dirt is about to hit your coffin, we detonate the bomb." He pointed to the folder containing the Swiss bank statements. "This is the nuclear option," Finch said. "But it is not enough to just show you have money. You need to prove their malice. You need to prove the conspiracy." "I have it," I whispered, leaning in closer. "I have them on tape. I have them admitting to the fraud. I have them admitting that Ryan isn't mine." Finch stopped writing. He looked up at me, his eyes softening for the first time. "I am sorry, Ben." "Don't be," I said, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. "It clarifies things. It makes the target smaller." I spent the next hour with Finch outlining every step of the dance we were about to perform. He would file a motion to allow me to represent myself, citing my desire to save money. It would make me look stubborn and confused, exactly what they wanted. We would lull them into a state of absolute arrogant security. When I left the diner, the sun was fully up, but the world looked different. It wasn't a place of despair anymore. It was a chessboard, and I had just positioned my queen. I returned home before anyone noticed I was gone, slipping back into the role of the frail invalid. But as soon as I was alone in my workshop, I began the most important task of the day. I found a sturdy cardboard box. I didn't want it to look professional. I wanted it to look personal. Into the box I placed a flash drive. It contained the video file from last night, edited down to the most damning 10 minutes. But a flash drive is cold. It is impersonal. I needed to bridge the gap between stranger and ally. I went to my parts bin and found it. A small, intricate escapement mechanism from a 19th century pocket watch. It was gold, delicate, and broken. I had fixed it years ago, but kept it as a reminder that time is fragile. I wrapped it in a piece of velvet and placed it next to the drive. Then I sat down to write the letter. I chose a heavy cream-colored paper, similar to the one Julian Roth had used all those years ago. My hand hovered over the page. I needed to strike the perfect chord. I needed to speak not to the judge, but to the daughter. To the daughter of an old friend, I wrote, the ink flowing smoothly from my fountain pen. 30 years ago, your father summoned me to his home. He had a bird that wouldn't sing, and a heart that was heavy with regret. He told me that the world was full of people who only saw the gold plating, but never cared for the gears that made the world turn. He told me about a daughter he loved, but couldn't reach because his wealth had built a wall between them. I fixed his bird, Judge Hayes. I made it sing again, not by forcing it, but by listening to it. Now I find myself in a world of gold plating. I am surrounded by people who eat at my table and sleep under my roof, yet see me only as a broken machine to be scrapped for parts. They think I am silent. They think I am stopped. But like your father, I know that the truth is often hidden in the mechanism. Enclosed is the sound of my gears. It is ugly. It is painful. But it is the truth. I ask you not for favors, but for a moment of your time. Please listen to what the silence of my house has recorded. Let this clock speak the truth that the law sometimes ignores. I signed it simply, Benjamin Carter, watchmaker. I sealed the envelope with wax, pressing my thumb into the warm red pool to leave a print. It was primitive. It was real. I taped the box shut and addressed it to her private chambers, marking it personal and confidential. I would drop it in the mailbox on the corner during my afternoon shuffle around the block. As I held the package in my hands, I felt a strange sense of peace. The message was sent. The connection was made. Now all I had to do was wait for the gavel to fall. The morning of the hearing did not begin with a gavel or a judge. It began with an ambush in my own kitchen. The sun had barely crested the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gray, when I shuffled downstairs to find them waiting for me. The air in the room was thick, suffocating, charged with a predatory energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. On the granite island, where we used to bake cookies for Christmas, sat a stack of legal documents. They were thick, intimidating, and marked with colorful sticky notes indicating where I needed to sign. Camilla stood on one side, her arms crossed, wearing a sharp black suit that looked more appropriate for a funeral than a family breakfast. Ryan stood on the other, pacing back and forth like a caged tiger, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the counter. "Sit down," Ben, Camilla said. It was not an invitation. It was a command. I moved slowly, letting my feet drag on the floor, my shoulders hunched in exaggerated frailty. I pulled out my chair and sank into it, letting out a small, confused whimper. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Is it time to go to the doctor?" "It is time to be reasonable," Ryan snapped. He slammed his hand down on the papers, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet house. "These are the transfer papers, Dad. The ones we talked about. We need you to sign them before we leave for the courthouse." I stared at the papers. The text was dense, a wall of legalese designed to strip a man of his agency. I saw words like irrevocable total control and guardianship. But I don't understand. I stammered, reaching out a shaking hand to touch the page. "Why do I have to sign now? Can't the judge look at it first? We are doing this to save you the embarrassment." Camilla said, her voice dropping to that icy, patronizing tone she had perfected over the last week. "If you sign these now, we can tell the judge that everything is settled. We can tell her that you agreed to let us take care of you. We can keep your condition private." "My condition," I whispered. "You mean being old?" "I mean being incompetent," Ryan spat. He walked around the island and stood over me. He was looming, using his height and his youth to intimidate me. I looked up at him into the eyes of the man I had raised, and I saw nothing but contempt. "Just sign the damn papers, old man. We don't have time for your little confused act today." I need my glasses, I said, patting my pockets uselessly. I can't sign what I can't read. You don't need to read it, Ryan growled. He grabbed my shoulder. His grip was hard, painful. He dug his fingers into the muscle right near the collarbone. It was a physical threat, the first time my son had ever laid a hand on me in anger. The shock of it was worse than the pain. My heart stuttered in my chest, a dangerous flutter that reminded me of my fragility. Ryan, don't hurt him, Camilla said, but she didn't move to stop him. She just checked her watch. We are running late. Make him sign. Ryan shoved me back against the chair. The force of it knocked the wind out of me. My head snapped back, hitting the wood. It wasn't a hard blow, but it was enough to dizzy me. Stop stalling, Ryan hissed, his face inches from mine. Sign the papers, or so help me God. I will have you committed to the state facility. The one with the barred windows and the smell of urine. Is that what you want? Do you want to die alone in a cage? I looked at him. I saw the greed in his eyes, the desperation. He was terrified that the money would slip through his fingers. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I let my eyes lose focus. I needed to make them believe I was broken. I needed to make them believe I was terrified. No. No cage, I mumbled, tears welling up in my eyes. Please, I'll be good. Then sign, he yelled, shoving a pen into my hand. My hand shook violently. I held the pen like a child holding a crayon. I looked at the glass of water sitting on the table next to me. It was my prop. My final act of submission. As I moved my hand toward the paper, I let a violent tremor overtake my arm. My elbow knocked into the glass. The water went everywhere. It splashed over the table, soaking the edge of the documents, but mostly it poured into my lap. I gasped, dropping the pen. I looked down at my wet trousers, my face crumpling into a mask of shame and panic. Oh no, I cried, my voice rising in pitch. Oh no, I made a mess. I think I didn't finish the sentence. I let the implication hang in the air. I let them think I had lost control of my bladder. The reaction was instantaneous. Ryan jumped back as if I were radioactive, his face twisting in absolute disgust. Oh my God, he shouted, wiping a few drops of water from his expensive suit jacket. He pissed himself. Jesus Christ, he is leaking like a broken pipe. This is disgusting. Camilla covered her mouth, her eyes wide with revulsion. She didn't offer a napkin. She didn't offer help. She just looked at me like I was a stain on her carpet. Just get him to sign it, and let's get out of here, she said, her voice muffled behind her hand. I can't stand the smell. Ryan kicked the pen back toward me across the wet floor. Sign it, he barked from a safe distance. Sign it and then go change. You are pathetic. I reached down my hand, trembling, and picked up the wet pen. I pulled the damp papers toward me. I didn't try to make it legible. I scrawled a jagged, looping line that vaguely resembled my initials. It was the signature of a man whose mind had gone. It was the signature of a victim. There, I whispered, pushing the paper away. I did it. Ryan snatched the papers up, checking to make sure the signature was on the line. He didn't care that it was messy. He just cared that it was there. Finally, he muttered. He looked at me one last time, shaking his head. You used to be someone, Ben. Now look at you. A wet, shaking mess. Do us all a favor and stay in the car when we get to court. I don't want anyone seeing you like this. We will meet you in the car, Camilla said, grabbing her purse. Clean yourself up and hurry. They turned and walked out of the kitchen. I listened to their footsteps, retreating, the sound of their voices, bickering about who would hold the wet folder. The front door opened and closed. I heard the electronic chirp of the car alarm disarming. I sat there for a moment in the silence of the kitchen. The water on my pants was cold, but I didn't feel it. I felt heat, a burning, righteous heat that started in my chest and spread to my fingertips. Slowly, deliberately, I stood up. I didn't push myself up with my arms. I stood up using the strength of my legs. I straightened my back, hearing the vertebrae pop into alignment. I rolled my shoulders back, shedding the hunch of the defeated old man. I looked at the puddle on the floor. I looked at the empty space where my son had stood and threatened me. I walked to the sink and grabbed a towel. I wiped my hands, drying them thoroughly. I looked at my reflection in the window. The man staring back wasn't confused. He wasn't scared. His eyes were clear, sharp, and hard as diamonds. "Go ahead and laugh," I said to the empty room, my voice steady and deep. "Laugh while you still can. Because where we are going, you won't be the ones doing the talking." I went upstairs to change into my suit. My best suit. The one I wore to weddings and funerals. Today it would be for both. A funeral for their greed, and a wedding of truth and justice. I buttoned the shirt, tied the tie with a perfect Windsor knot, and looked in the mirror one last time. "Showtime," I whispered. I walked out of the house, leaving the wet towel on the floor. I didn't lock the door. There was nothing left in there worth stealing. The real treasure was in my pocket, and the real thief was about to be caught. I walked to the car where they were waiting, opened the door, and slid into the back seat. I slumped down, let my mouth hang open, and waited for the ride to hell to begin. Little did they know I was the one driving the bus. The rain battered against the high arched windows of the judge's chambers, blurring the skyline of the city into a smear of gray and steel. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old law books and stale coffee. Judge Marianne Hayes rubbed her temples, trying to massage away the headache that had been threatening to split her skull since 9 in the morning. Her desk was a battlefield of paperwork, a white sea of motions, affidavits, and petitions that all boiled down to the same ugly truth: greed. In her 20 years on the bench, she had seen it all. She had seen siblings fight over a mother's wedding ring before the body was even cold. She had seen business partners stab each other in the back for a percentage point. But the worst cases were always the families. The husbands and wives who turned love into a weapon, who used children as pawns and bank accounts as scoreboards. She looked down at the file currently open on her blotter. Carter versus Carter. It was an emergency petition for guardianship filed by a wife and son against a 70-year-old man. The allegations were standard: cognitive decline, paranoia, inability to manage finances. The medical report attached was signed by a doctor she vaguely recognized, a man known more for his high fees than his ethical standards. It all looked neat. It all looked proper. It looked like a loving family trying to protect a senile patriarch from hurting himself. But something about it tasted sour. Maybe it was the speed of the filing. Maybe it was the fact that the assets involved were substantial. Or maybe she was just tired of seeing old men discarded like broken furniture the moment they became inconvenient. Marianne sighed, reaching for her cold cup of coffee. She spun her chair around to look at the rain. She wondered if there was any justice left in the world, or if she was just a glorified accountant refereeing the distribution of spoils. The intercom on her desk buzzed, jarring her from her thoughts. Judge Hayes, her clerk's voice crackled through the speaker. "A courier just dropped off a package for you. It is marked personal and confidential." He said it couldn't wait. "Send it in," Marianne said, spinning back to face the room. Her clerk, a young woman named Sarah, walked in holding a brown cardboard box. It was small, taped shut with excessive care, and addressed in a handwriting that was elegant but shaky. It wasn't the sterile label of a law firm. It was handwritten. Marianne took the box, feeling its weight. It was light, but something rattled softly inside. She reached for her letter opener, a silver blade that had belonged to her father, and sliced through the tape. She opened the flaps. Inside, nestled in a bed of dark blue velvet, lay a tiny golden object. Marianne froze. She reached in and picked it up, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. It was an escapement mechanism from an antique pocket watch, a detent escapement to be precise. It was broken, the delicate balance wheel bent at an unnatural angle, but she recognized it. Not this specific one, but the type. Her father, Julian Roth, had been obsessed with them. He used to say that a watch escapement was the heartbeat of the universe, the device that sliced eternity into manageable human seconds. She set the mechanism down on her blotter and picked up the letter beneath it. The paper was heavy cream-colored, the kind her father used to use for his most private correspondence. She began to read. To the daughter of an old friend. The words jumped off the page. As she read, on the headache behind her eyes began to fade, replaced by a tightness in her throat. The letter spoke of a mechanical bird, a silver peacock with sapphire eyes. A memory she hadn't touched in 30 years came rushing back. She was 10 years old, hiding behind the heavy oak doors of her father's library, watching a stranger work on the machine that no one else could fix. She remembered the music. She remembered her father, a man made of stone and iron, weeping silently as the bird sang. She remembered him telling her later that the man who fixed it was a wizard, a man who listened to the metal. This letter was from him. Benjamin Carter. The man in the file on her desk. The man her court was about to declare incompetent. She finished the letter, her heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. He wasn't asking for mercy. He was asking her to listen. She looked back into the box and saw the flash drive. It was modern plastic, ugly compared to the gold gear, but it held the answer. Marianne didn't hesitate. She plugged the drive into her secure laptop. A folder popped up, one video file. She put on her headphones, shutting out the sound of the rain, and pressed play. The image was grainy black and white, shot from a high angle. A living room. A man and a woman sitting on a sofa. Marianne recognized the woman from the case file photos. Camilla Carter. And the man was not Ben. She listened. For 10 minutes, she didn't move. She didn't blink. She heard the laughter. She heard the mockery. She heard the wife call her husband a sentimental old fool. She heard the plans to empty the offshore accounts. She heard the doctor, the lover, ask about the son. And then she heard the confession that made her blood turn to ice. Ryan isn't Ben's son, Miles. He is yours. Marianne tore the headphones off her ears as if they were burning her. She stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floorboards. The fury that rose in her chest wasn't professional indignation. It was personal. It was primal. She looked at the gold gear on her desk, then at the file of lies they had submitted to her court. They weren't just stealing his money. They were stealing his life. They were using her, using the law, using the very system she had dedicated her life to as a weapon to murder a man's soul. They thought she was a rubber stamp. They thought because Ben Carter was old, because he was quiet, that he was weak. They had no idea that he had just handed the judge the hammer and she was ready to swing it. She hit the intercom button so hard it nearly stuck. "Sarah, get in here. Now." The clerk appeared in the doorway seconds later, looking alarmed at the tone in the judge's voice. "Clear my afternoon docket," Marianne commanded, her voice low and dangerous. "But Judge, you have the merger hearings and—" "I said clear it," Marianne snapped, grabbing the Carter file. "And call the clerk of courts. I want the Carter hearing moved up. I want them in my courtroom in 1 hour. Tell them the judge has had a cancellation and wants to expedite the emergency petition. Tell them I want to settle this today." "But Judge, is everything all right?" Sarah asked, eyeing the open box on the desk. Marianne looked at the broken gear, then up at her clerk. Her eyes were hard, shining with a terrifying clarity. "Everything is fine, Sarah. I just realized that I have been looking at a broken clock all morning, and it is about time someone fixed it." She sat back down, smoothing the front of her robe. She picked up the flash drive and slipped it into her pocket. She wasn't just a judge anymore. She was the daughter of Julian Roth. and she was about to make sure that the bird sang one last time loud enough to shatter the glass walls of their deception. "Bring them in," she whispered to the empty room. "Bring them all in." The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung open with a groan that sounded like a tomb being unsealed. I walked in my steps, measured and slow, clutching the arm of Arthur Finch, not for support, but for show. The room smelled of floor wax, old paper, and the stale perspiration of 1,000 desperate people who had stood where I was standing. It was a cold room designed to intimidate, designed to make you feel small before the majesty of the law. But as I walked down the center aisle, I didn't feel small. I felt like a coiled spring. I felt like a ticking bomb waiting for the countdown to reach zero. I looked to my left. The plaintiff's table was crowded. It looked less like a legal team and more like a corporate board meeting. Camilla was there, sitting in the center. She had changed her clothes. Gone was the sharp business suit from this morning. In its place, she wore a modest dark navy dress, high-necked and conservative. She wore no jewelry except her wedding band, the simple gold ring I had placed on her finger 45 years ago. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she held a crumpled tissue in her hand, dabbing at eyes that I knew were perfectly dry. She looked the part of the grieving, exhausted wife perfectly. She looked like a woman who had given everything and had nothing left to give. Next to her sat Ryan. He was hunched over, staring at the table, refusing to lift his head. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world, but I knew he was just calculating his share of the settlement. And flanking them were 3 lawyers. Their lead counsel was a man named Sterling, a shark in a 3-piece Italian suit, who smelled of expensive cologne and ruthlessness. He was arranging his papers with the precision of a surgeon preparing to amputate a limb. But the real insult, the thing that made my blood boil beneath my calm exterior, was in the gallery. Sitting in the front row, right behind Camilla, was Miles. He shouldn't have been there. This was a family matter. But his arrogance knew no bounds. He sat with his legs crossed, one arm draped casually over the back of the bench. He caught my eye as I shuffled to my seat. He didn't look away. He smirked. It was a tiny, imperceptible curling of the lip, a silent message that said, "I win, and you lose." He looked at me like I was already dead, like I was a ghost haunting his future fortune. I sat down at the defendant's table. It was empty. Just me and Finch. My lawyer looked like he had been carved out of granite and left in the rain for a century. He placed his battered leather briefcase on the table and folded his gnarled hands on top of it. He didn't open a laptop. He didn't stack piles of evidence. He just sat there, breathing slowly, his eyes half closed. To the rest of the room, we looked pathetic. A senile old man and his dinosaur attorney hopelessly outmatched by the sleek modern machinery of Camilla's legal team. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, his voice bouncing off the high ceiling. Judge Marianne Hayes entered the room. She was younger than I expected, with sharp features and eyes that scanned the room like a radar. She didn't look at the lawyers. She didn't look at the gallery. She looked straight at me. For a fleeting second, our eyes locked. I didn't see recognition, but I saw curiosity. I saw the daughter of Julian Roth looking for the gears beneath the gold plating. Then she sat down, the black robe settling around her shoulders, and the proceedings began. Mr. Sterling stood up first. He buttoned his jacket with a flourish and walked toward the judge, his voice smooth as oiled silk. "Your Honor." He began gesturing toward me with a look of profound pity. "We are here today with heavy hearts. This is not a case about money. This is not a case about property. This is a case about safety. It is a case about protecting a man who can no longer protect himself." He paused for effect, letting the silence hang in the air. "Benjamin Carter is a man who built an empire." Sterling continued pacing back and forth. "But tragically, the mind that built that empire is failing. Following his recent heart surgery, Mr. Carter has exhibited severe cognitive decline. He is paranoid. He is confused, and most terrifying of all. Your Honor, he has become volatile. Volatile. The word hung in the air. I kept my face blank, my mouth slightly open, playing the part. But inside I was screaming. We have evidence, Sterling went on, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, that Mr. Carter has been spending recklessly. Large sums of money have vanished from household accounts. He forgets paying bills. He forgets where he is. But worse than the financial ruin is the physical danger. Just this morning, Your Honor, Mr. Carter became violent with his own son. He attacked Ryan Carter in a fit of confusion, and in his agitated state he lost control of his bodily functions. I heard a gasp from the gallery. Sterling turned and pointed a finger at me. Look at him. Your Honor, he sits there in a suit, but beneath that facade is a man who is terrified and lost. We are asking the court to grant emergency guardianship to his wife, Camilla Carter, not to take his money, but to save his life, to ensure he gets the professional care he needs in a secure facility, rather than hurting himself or his loved ones in his own home. Sterling sat down looking solemn. It was a masterclass in character assassination. He hadn't just called me old. He had painted me as a monster. A dangerous, leaking, violent monster that needed to be put in a cage. Then they called their first witness. Camilla took the stand. She walked slowly, holding the railing as if she were frail. She swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and I wondered if the Bible would burst into flames under her hand. Mrs. Carter, Sterling asked softly, "Tell the court about your husband's behavior since the surgery." Camilla took a deep breath, and a single perfect tear rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away with the tissue. "It has been a nightmare," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I love Ben. I have loved him for 45 years. But the man sitting at that table is not my husband. My husband was kind. He was sharp. This man, he stares at walls. He talks to people who aren't there. He hoards trash in the garage and calls it treasure." She looked at me, her eyes swimming with fake sorrow. Last night, she continued, her voice gaining strength. He was wandering the house in the dark. He was muttering about enemies, about traps. I was scared, Your Honor. For the first time in my marriage, I locked the bedroom door because I was afraid of Ben. Lies, all lies. I sat there gripping the edge of the table, forcing myself not to stand up and shout. She was twisting my silence, my hobbies, my very existence into a narrative of madness. And this morning, Sterling pressed. This morning was the breaking point, Camilla sobbed. He didn't know who Ryan was. He started screaming. He fell down. He soiled himself in the kitchen. It broke my heart to see him like that. I just want him to be safe. I just want to make sure he doesn't hurt anyone. Please, Your Honor, help me help him. She stepped down, dabbing her eyes, looking for all the world like a saint burdened with a sinner. The courtroom was silent. I could feel the eyes of the stenographer, the bailiff, even the judge weighing heavily on me. They were looking at the old man who peed his pants. They were looking at the tragedy. Then came the final blow. Ryan took the stand. My son. The boy I had taught to shave. The boy I had bailed out of trouble in college. He sat in the witness box looking handsome and young and trustworthy. Ryan, Sterling asked, "Do you love your father?" Ryan looked at me. For a second I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes. But then he looked past me toward Miles in the gallery, and the shame vanished, replaced by cold resolve. "I do," Ryan said, his voice steady. "He was my hero growing up," was Sterling repeated. "And now..." Ryan sighed, shaking his head. "Now he is a danger. Dad isn't Dad anymore. When he grabbed me this morning, When I looked in his eyes, there was nothing there. No recognition. Just anger. He is gone, Your Honor. The father I knew is gone. And if we don't take control of the finances, if we don't take control of the company, he is going to burn it all down in his confusion. He needs to be in a home. It is the only way. Ryan looked at the judge, his face a mask of earnest concern. Please, Your Honor, don't let him destroy the legacy he built. Let us take the wheel before he drives off a cliff. He stepped down. The testimony was over. The picture they had painted was complete. I was a senile, violent, incontinent wreck who needed to be institutionalized for his own good. I looked at Camilla. She was holding Ryan's hand. Miles was grinning openly now. They had done it. They had executed the perfect coup. They had stripped me of my dignity in front of the law, and they had done it with tears in their eyes. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Finch. He didn't look at me. He just tapped his finger on the table once, twice. It was the signal. It was time. Judge Hayes looked at the paperwork in front of her. She looked at Camilla. She looked at Ryan. Then she turned her gaze to me. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice neutral. Your counsel has remained silent. Do you have anything to say in your defense before I rule on this petition? I stood up. I didn't use the table for support. I didn't shake. I buttoned my suit jacket, feeling the familiar weight of the fabric. I looked at Camilla, whose fake smile was faltering. I looked at Ryan, who was frowning. I looked at Miles, whose smirk was freezing on his face. Yes, Your Honor. I said, my voice clear and strong, filling the room without a microphone. I have quite a lot to say, and I believe my defense has already been delivered to your chambers. I saw Judge Hayes's eyes widen slightly. She reached into her pocket. She didn't pull out a gavel. She pulled out a small black flash drive. The room went deadly silent. The air pressure seemed to drop. The arrogance on the other side of the aisle began to crack, replaced by the first dawning realization that the old lion wasn't toothless after all. He was just waiting for them to get close enough to bite. Judge Hayes held the flash drive in her hand for a moment, weighing it as if it were a physical piece of evidence from a crime scene. She looked at the defense table where my lawyer Arthur Finch sat with his eyes closed, the picture of serene confidence. Then she looked at me. I stood up slowly. I did not need the table for support this time. I buttoned my jacket with steady fingers, smoothing the lapels. The trembling old man was gone, replaced by the craftsman who had spent 50 years bringing order to chaos. The room was silent, waiting for me to ramble, waiting for me to prove my incompetence with a senile outburst. I looked at Camilla. Her face was a mask of confusion that was rapidly cracking into fear. She sensed the shift in the air. She knew deep down in the black pit of her soul that the dynamic had changed. I turned to the judge. My voice was not loud, but it carried to the back of the room without a microphone. Your Honor, I said, they have told you that my mind is broken. They have told you that I am lost in the past. But I am a watchmaker. I do not deal in confusion. I deal in precision. I deal in truth. And there is one thing in my house that listens better than any human. I pointed a finger at the laptop on her bench. I am not asking you to take my word for it. I am asking you to let time speak for itself. Play the recording. I sat down. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Mr. Sterling, the high-priced lawyer, started to object. He stood up, sputtering about admissibility and surprise evidence, but Judge Hayes cut him off with a single sharp motion of her hand. She plugged the drive into the port on her bench. She tapped a few keys. She turned the speakers toward the courtroom. At first there was only static, a low, rhythmic hum. Then distinct and sharp came the sound of ticking. Talk, talk, talk. It was the heartbeat of the Eagle clock. It echoed off the mahogany walls of the courtroom, a steady, relentless judgment. Then came the sound of a door opening, footsteps, and finally voices. The quality was crystal clear. It was as if Camilla and Miles were standing in the center of the room. "Is he out?" Miles's voice rang out. "He took 2 sleeping pills," Camilla's voice replied, followed by that cruel, dismissive laughter. "He is out like a light. He won't wake up if a bomb goes off." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. The jurors who had been looking at me with pity just moments ago now sat up straighter. Mr. Sterling froze halfway to his seat, his mouth hanging open. He looked at his client, his eyes wide with the realization that he had been lied to. The recording played on. Every word was a hammer blow. The courtroom listened as my wife and her lover discussed the emergency petition. They heard the details of the offshore accounts. They heard the plan to bribe the doctors to falsify my medical records. They heard Camilla mocking my tears, calling me a pathetic, sentimental old fool. Camilla's face turned the color of ash. She gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. She looked around the room, her eyes darting like a trapped animal looking for an exit, looking for an excuse. But there was nowhere to go. Her own voice was filling the room, stripping away her mask of the grieving wife and revealing the cold, calculating predator underneath. "Stop it," she whispered, her voice cracking. That is out of context." But the tape kept rolling. The judge did not stop it. She leaned back in her chair, her face hard as stone, listening to the conspiracy unfold. The sound of Miles's arrogance filled the air, his laughter, his greed. In the gallery, Miles had stopped smirking. He was slouching lower and lower in his seat, trying to make himself invisible. He looked at the door, calculating the distance, but he saw the bailiff standing there, arms crossed, blocking the way. Then came the moment that shattered everything. The audio shifted. The tone of the conversation changed. Miles asked the question that sealed their fate. "But what about the boy? Ryan is on board now because of the money, but he is still his son." I looked at Ryan. He was staring at the speaker on the judge's bench, his face pale, his brow furrowed. He was confused. He didn't know this part of the conversation. He had never heard this part. Camilla closed her eyes. She knew what was coming. She let out a small, strangled sob, not of sorrow, but of terror. The recording delivered the answer. "Oh, Miles, you really don't get it, do you? Ryan won't betray us. He knows who his real family is." The tension in the courtroom was so high it felt like the air might ignite. Every eye was fixed on the speaker. Every breath was held. I told him the truth about the summer of 1989, Camilla's voice said, clear and triumphant. "Ryan isn't Ben's son, Miles. He is yours." The silence that followed that sentence was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb exploding the split second before the shockwave hits. Then a sound tore through the room. It was a scream. Not a scream of fear, but of pure, unadulterated agony. No, Ryan leaped to his feet. His chair clattered backward, hitting the floor with a loud crash. He looked at his mother, his eyes wide, wild, and filled with a horror so profound it was painful to watch. No, he screamed again, grabbing his own hair, pulling at it, as if trying to wake himself from a nightmare. "You are lying. Tell them you are lying." Camilla didn't move. She stared at the table, refusing to look at him. Her silence was the confirmation. Ryan turned to Miles. He looked at the man he had conspired with, the man he had treated as a friend, a mentor. He looked at Miles's dark eyes, his sharp chin, and he saw his own reflection staring back at him. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, his legs hitting the table. "You knew," Ryan whispered, his voice broken. "You both knew." He looked at me. For the first time that day, for the first time in years, he really looked at me. He saw the man he had called senile, the man he had tried to put in a cage, The man who had sat by his bed when he had fevers, who had taught him to drive, who had cheered at his graduations. He saw the only father he had ever known, and he realized he had just tried to destroy him for a stranger. Dad, Ryan choked out, reaching a hand toward me across the aisle. Dad, Order! Judge Hayes banged her gavel, the sharp crack cutting through the chaos. Order in this court. But the order was gone. The truth was out, naked and ugly and undeniable. Miles stood up, panic overtaking him. He tried to push past the people in his row, heading for the exit. Sit down, the bailiff shouted, stepping forward and placing a heavy hand on Miles's chest, shoving him back into the seat. You aren't going anywhere. Ryan collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with violent sobs. Camilla sat like a statue, frozen in the ruins of her life. And I sat there calm and still. I watched them unravel. I watched the lies dissolve. I felt no joy. I felt no triumph. I just felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a job well done. The gears had turned. The clock had struck, and the time for reckoning had finally arrived. The silence that descended upon the courtroom was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. The echo of the gavel was gone, replaced by the weight of the truth that had just been exposed. Ryan was slumped in his chair, a broken man staring at the floor, while Miles looked like a rat, trapped in a corner, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit, where the bailiff stood with crossed arms. Camilla sat frozen, her face a pale mask of shock, her mouth slightly open, as if she were trying to form words that refused to come. Judge Hayes let the silence stretch, letting the reality of their betrayal settle into the marrow of their bones. She looked down at them from her bench, her expression not of anger, but of cold, clinical disappointment. She adjusted her glasses, picked up the file that contained their fraudulent petition, and closed it with a sharp, final snap. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, her voice cutting through the air like a razor. You and your team are dismissed. I suggest you distance yourselves from these clients immediately, unless you wish to be investigated for suborning perjury. Sterling didn't hesitate. He began packing his briefcase with frantic speed, not looking at Camilla or Ryan once. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one. As for the petitioners, Judge Hayes continued, turning her gaze to Camilla. This court finds that the emergency guardianship petition is not only baseless, but malicious. The evidence provided by Mr. Carter and authenticated by the audio recording proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Benjamin Carter is fully competent. In fact, he appears to be the only person in this family capable of rational thought. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Camilla. But I am not just dismissing this case, Mrs. Carter. I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office. Based on the recording, there is clear evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted grand larceny, and perjury. You came into my courtroom, swore an oath on the Bible, and lied to my face to steal a man's life. That is not something I take lightly. Camilla finally found her voice. It was a thin, shrill sound. But, Your Honor, we were worried about him. The recording, it was just talk. We didn't do anything. You attempted to strip a citizen of his civil rights based on a fabrication. Judge Hayes interrupted, her voice rising. You falsified medical concerns. You conspired to empty bank accounts. That is not talk, Mrs. Carter. That is a crime. Officers, please detain the petitioners and Mr. Harrison until the police arrive to take their statements. The bailiffs moved in. The sound of heavy boots on the floor was the only sound in the room. Miles stood up to protest, but a hand on his shoulder forced him back down. Ryan didn't move. He just sat there weeping silently, a boy who had lost a father he never really had, and a mother who had used him as a pawn. But Judge Hayes wasn't finished. She held up a hand, stopping the officers for a moment. She looked at me, a small knowing smile touching her lips. She reached into the folder on her desk, the one Finch had provided Maud, and pulled out a document stamped with the seal of a Swiss bank. "One moment, officers," she said. "Before you take them away, there is one final matter of assets to clarify. Since Mrs. Carter was so concerned about her husband's financial status, I think it is only fair she knows exactly what she tried to steal." She looked at Camilla, who was now trembling visibly. "You filed this petition to gain control of the Carter factory and the domestic savings accounts," Judge Hayes said, looking at the paper. "You estimated the estate to be worth approximately $4 million. Camilla nodded, dumbly, tears streaming down her face. "It is a shame your greed made you so short-sighted," the judge continued, her voice dripping with irony. "If you had been a loyal wife, if you had treated your husband with even an ounce of the respect he deserved, you might have known about the other assets." "Other assets," Camilla whispered. Judge Hayes held up the document. 30 years ago, Mr. Carter performed a service for my father, Julian Roth. He was paid in bearer bonds and a secure trust in Geneva. He has never touched it. He let it grow. As of this morning, the value of Benjamin Carter's personal separate estate is just over $22 million. The number hung in the air. 22 million. I watched Camilla's face. It was a masterpiece of tragedy. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her eyes went wide, her jaw dropped, and the color drained from her skin until she looked like a corpse. She had destroyed her marriage, her reputation, and her freedom for $4 million when she had been sleeping next to $22 million for decades. Her greed hadn't just made her a criminal, it had made her a fool. You have $20 million, she gasped, looking at me with a mixture of horror and hunger. Ben, wait. We can talk about this." I didn't know. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I looked at her, really looked at her for the last time. "No, Camilla," I said, my voice steady and calm. "We cannot talk. Because like you said, I am just a sentimental old fool, and fools and their money are soon parted. But not today. Today the fool keeps the money, and you keep the consequences." I turned to the judge and bowed my head slightly. "Thank you, Your Honor, for listening to the gears." She nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of the debt paid, the loop closed. I turned my back on them. I heard Camilla screaming my name. I heard Ryan sobbing, calling out, "Dad, please, I didn't know." I heard Miles cursing as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. But the sounds were distant, fading like a radio station losing its signal. They were the noise of the past. I was walking toward the future. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the hallway. The air in the corridor was cool and quiet. I walked past the reporters who were just starting to gather, ignoring their questions. I pushed through the front doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the afternoon sun. The rain had stopped. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue, scrubbed clean by the storm. The air smelled of wet pavement and fresh earth. I stood on the top step, taking a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweetness of it. I was 70 years old. I was alone. I had no wife. I had no son. To the world, I had lost my family. But as I looked out at the city, at the cars moving in the distance, at the people walking their dogs and living their lives, I didn't feel loss. I felt lighter than I had in 30 years. The heavy cloak of deception I hadn't even known I was wearing had been lifted. I was no longer the duped husband. I was no longer the ATM machine for a stranger's son. I was Benjamin Carter. I was a master craftsman. I was a man who had faced the worst betrayal imaginable and had come out the other side not bitter, but victorious. I reached into my pocket and touched the old broken watch gear I always carried. It was a reminder. Things break. People break. But if you have the patience, if you have the will, you can rebuild. I wouldn't rebuild my old life. That house, that furniture, those memories, they could keep them. I would sell it all. I would take my tools, my clock, and my dignity, and I would start something new. Maybe a school for young watchmakers. Maybe a foundation in Julian Roth's name. It didn't matter what I did as long as it was real. I walked down the steps, my stride long and confident. I didn't look back at the courthouse. I didn't look back at the police cars pulling up to the curb. I adjusted my cuffs, checked the time on my wristwatch, and smiled. It was 3 o'clock. The day was still young, and for the first time in a long time, the time belonged entirely to me. Many people ask me what happened after the doors of that courthouse closed, after the adrenaline faded and the silence returned. They ask if I ever regretted turning my back on my own son, or if I ever felt a pang of guilt for sending my wife to prison. The answer is complex. I did not feel guilt, but I felt a profound, aching sadness, not for the people they were, but for the people I had wanted them to be. The legal process moved swiftly, fueled by the mountain of evidence I had provided. Camilla and Miles were charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and attempted grand larceny. Without my money to pay for high-end defense attorneys, they turned on each other with vicious speed. Miles testified that it was all Camilla's idea, that she had manipulated him. Camilla screamed that Miles had seduced her and twisted her mind. It was a pathetic spectacle, two predators tearing each other apart over the scraps of a failed meal. They were both sentenced to significant prison terms. I didn't go to the sentencing. I had already seen enough. Ryan's fate was perhaps the most tragic, yet the most necessary. He wasn't charged criminally, as his involvement was deemed coerced by his mother, but his life imploded. The DNA test confirmed what the recording had revealed: he was Miles's son. But Miles wanted nothing to do with him. To Miles, Ryan was just living evidence of his crime, a burden. Ryan lost the father he thought he had in me and was rejected by the biological father he never knew. He tried to call me weeks later. He left a voicemail sobbing, asking if we could just get coffee, if we could start over. I listened to it once, then I deleted it. I didn't block his number, but I never called back. Forgiveness is something you give to someone who makes a mistake. What Ryan did wasn't a mistake. It was a character flaw. And at 70 years old, I didn't have the time or the energy to raise another man's son all over again. Instead, I focused on the future. I sold the house. I sold the furniture. I sold every single item that carried the stench of their deception. With the proceeds combined with the interest from the Julian Roth Trust, I bought an old brick building in the downtown district. It had high ceilings and tall windows that let in the northern light, perfect for watchmaking. 6 months later, I opened the doors to the Roth Carter Academy of Horology. It wasn't a business. It was a sanctuary. I partnered with local youth programs to find kids like I used to be, quiet, obsessive, good with their hands, but written off by the school system as slow or unfocused. I gave them tools. I gave them a workbench. I taught them that patience is a superpower and that precision is a language. One afternoon, I was showing a young girl named Maya how to seat a balance spring. She was frustrated, her hands shaking. I placed my hand over hers, just as old Mr. Giraud had done for me 50 years ago. "Breathe," I told her. "The metal isn't your enemy. It's just waiting for you to understand it." She took a breath, steadied her hand, and the spring clicked into place. The look on her face, that pure, unadulterated pride, was worth more than all the millions sitting in the bank in Geneva. I looked up and saw a woman standing in the doorway of the workshop. It was Marianne Hayes. She wasn't wearing her judge's robe. She was wearing a simple coat, looking at the bustling room with a soft smile. She walked over to me. "My father would have loved this," she said quietly, looking at the brass gears scattered on the benches. "He always said that machines were easier to understand than people." "He was right," I replied, wiping oil from my hands with a rag. "Machines break because of friction or wear. People break because of greed. Machines are easier to fix." "You fixed more than machines, Ben," she said, touching my arm. "You fixed a wrong, and you built something right in its place." We stood there for a moment, two children of complicated legacies watching a new generation learn the art of time. I realized then that my life hadn't ended in that bedroom when I heard my wife plotting my death. That was just the end of a chapter I had stayed in for too long. This, the smell of oil, the ticking of 100 clocks, the future being built one gear at a time, this was the beginning. I am Benjamin Carter. I am a master craftsman. And finally, after 70 years, I am exactly where I am meant to be. We are often taught that family is the most important thing in the world, that blood is thicker than water, and that we must forgive everything for the sake of unity. But my story is a reminder that family is not defined by DNA or marriage certificates. Family is defined by respect, loyalty, and love. When those things are gone, when you are being used and disrespected, you have every right to walk away. Do not let guilt keep you in a cage. Do not let the fear of being alone keep you surrounded by snakes. Your dignity is worth more than their approval. Stand up for yourself, even if you have to stand alone. If you have ever felt undervalued by those closest to you, or if you enjoyed seeing justice finally served, please hit the like button and share this story. It helps more than you know. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about truth, resilience, and the power of the human spirit. I'll see you in the next video. Stay strong.